there was an article this morning in The Independent, and it said, "How are you, right?"
Hello.
It said, "Labour is nowhere to be seen. The conflict in Britain is now inside the Conservative Party." That's what they said. So they're implying that Labour is irrelevant and the Tory party is the only place where the action's going on. Now, this is a misunderstanding. It's a very superficial way of thinking for the following reason. And that's because when a society enters into crisis, the institutions that represent the existing status quo, so whatever's been created historically to represent the existing structures, interests, groups and so on, begins to break down. And the internal structure of these parties begins to have little fissures inside it, little splits. And eventually these splits open up into great big chasms and wounds, unable to be controlled. And that is what you are seeing, for example, in the United States of America, the Republican Party breaking in half, and the main candidate for the leadership of the Republican Party comes from outside of the Republican Party. Now, the main opposition figure inside the Democratic Party comes from outside the Democratic Party. He only joined in September last year. So, Bernie Sanders, that is. So underneath the surface, the crisis that happened in 2008, causing, in the case of America, millions of people to lose their homes, mass impoverishment and an increase in the wealth for the minority, resulted in a conflict and breakup of the existing structure of political parties. There are only two parties in America, both of whom effectively represent the same interests, except some minor differences about liberal policies and reactionary policies in relation to attitudes, opinions, things like that, rather than the fundamental economic structure. So too in the Conservative Party in Britain and the Labour Party in Britain. The economic crisis created an internal crisis inside society, which then appears inside the political and institutional arrangements which were suited to the past. That is why Jeremy Corbyn was elected inside the Labour Party, contrary to expectations of the media and of the Labour Party leadership and probably of the Labour Party membership. And that's also why a figure who was always known as a right-winger, like Ian Duncan Smith, and a figure like Boris Johnson, suddenly come out of the woodwork as loyal supporters and turn out to be oppositionists of the first day, or so they'd like to present themselves. So Ian Duncan Smith, who himself carried out policies against the interests of pensioners, the disabled, the unemployed, suddenly profiles himself as to the left of David Cameron and George Osborne. Now that is because the conflicts inside society are affecting significant layers who would have voted Conservative at the last election. And the danger is, from the point of view of Ian Duncan Smith and his allies, is that they might vote Labour at the next election. And so they would like to try and gain control over the Conservative Party and present themselves as a more fair and caring face of the Conservative Party. But in the process, they split the Conservative Party, and to a large degree, I will accept, on its own, without crisis in the other side, Jeremy Corbyn, as stands, would probably, if there was an election today, would probably not win the election. But by the time the election comes up in 4 years' time, the Conservative Party may be 2 or 3 parties. And in those circumstances, the Labour Party, led by Jeremy Corbyn, will, in my opinion, win a landslide majority, because of the internal crisis reflecting itself in the government. Now, how did this show itself in the last parliamentary period? It was the Liberals and Conservatives in alliance. And that, of course, whilst it won positions temporarily for the leaders of the Liberal Party, it destroyed the Liberal Party electorally come the election. And you see the same process, these Liberals in Conservative Party membership They are now going to break away from the Conservative, or split the Conservative Party, in the same way as the Liberal Conservative coalition ruled over Britain before. They will stay together, but they will have open fissures and conflicts. Imagine, for example, that the vote goes in favour of staying inside Europe. What will Boris Johnson and co do, who are opposing maintaining themselves in Europe? They will constantly snipe from the side, waiting to attack David Cameron and take his position, and they will say, well, if only we'd left, if only we'd left, if only we'd left. They keep hammering on that. And then Ian Duncan Smith will say, if only we'd been fairer to the poor and not so happy, not so supportive of the rich, then we would have more support, and Jeremy Corbyn wouldn't be getting so much support, and nor would the SNP. And because of that, what we're seeing is societal crisis reflecting itself in the institutions of society, of politics, of economics, of education, the judiciary, the police force. After all, don't forget the police was threatening to strike only recently. The doctors, for God's sake. Doctors who are the bedrock of conservatism. The doctors, I was out last week on a picket line with the doctors, on a picket line. And there they were speaking alongside people. There was Vanessa Redgrave there, long-standing member of the Workers' Revolutionary Party, right? Alongside junior doctors. And they didn't have any problem listening to her and agreeing with her.
Will Labour manage to stay together?
Now, there are people in the Labour Party, generally members of the Parliamentary Labour Party, who themselves reflect the old order in society. They reflect the ideas of the 1990s, the ideas of Blairism, the ideas of so-called third way between capitalism and socialism, that you can make conservative ideas into the ideas of the Labour Party. And you can make the Labour Party the fair face of capitalism. Those people got a smashing defeat last summer, or better said in September the 12th last year, when Jeremy Corbyn won with 59% of the vote. They had hoped they would get at least a runoff between Andy Burnham and Jeremy, but he swept the board, completely annihilated them. But, of course, they are interested in their interests. Their interests are their political career, their personal finances, their prospects for employment after they're members of Parliament, because they can enter from the political world into the business world. They get directorships, positions of authority, speaking tours, like Tony Blair gets speaking tours, he gets £100,000 for a talk. So they had hoped.
How much do you get for a talk?
Sorry?
How much do you get for a talk?
The maximum I've ever been paid for a talk is £500.
Pretty good.
The maximum. I had to fly to India to do it though.
How much are you getting today?
Nothing at all. Nothing at all.
Sponsored by BP.
If you want to pay me today, I gave a talk this morning. I got £80 for it. But it's a walking tour. It's a walking tour of the life and ideas of Marx. I advertise it, promote it. What am I supposed to do? I have to get a living out of it.
I was only writing you up. I didn't.
It's fine. I give you a straight answer. It's a fair question. It's a fair question because you never know what people will get for what they're doing. However, I don't get that, nor do I expect to get it.
Would you like?
But if someone wants to offer me a lot of money for talking, I will do it.
Maybe that's what Blair did.
I will do it. It is what Blair did. It is what Blair did. But he had no ounce of socialism in him from the 1990s onwards, right? However, like Tony Blair, when I won my appeal against expulsion from the Labour Party 2 weeks ago, I explained to them, like Tony Blair, I came to the Labour Party through Marxism. And in 1983, Tony Blair wrote to the leader of the Labour Party and said, I came to the Labour Party through Marxism. So, why can't I be a Marxist if it's good enough for Tony Blair in his younger days? Why not for me? So, yes, if someone offers me lots of money, I will take the money and I will use it for the purposes of promoting socialism. I think that's a fair cause.
But for example, in the case of Bernie Sanders in the United States of America, and by the way, I hope you're supporting Bernie Sanders if you're from America. If you're not from America, tomorrow night we'll be holding a meeting of organisers campaigning for Bernie Sanders' election at the Unite headquarters in Theobald's Road at 6:30 in the evening, where you can participate in the election in America by contacting people by phone or by Facebook or by making videos and so on, sending messages to the people in America in the key states that are coming up. We have to win 58% of the vote across the board in the next primaries in the states. But it is still possible. At the time, for example, a month before Jeremy Corbyn was elected in Britain as leader of the Labour Party, we were still about 10 to 1. About 10 to 1. But come the day, we were odds-on favourite to win the election. Bernie Sanders is now 14 to 1, odds against winning the election. But we can shift that because millions and millions of people in America are open to the ideas that Bernie Sanders has been expressing, which I will express in 2 sentences. 1, the billionaire class cannot have it all. 2, America requires a political revolution so that democracy exists not just for the billionaires but for the mass of the population. Those 2 slogans are the base on which Bernie Sanders has mobilised hundreds of thousands of people to turn out to his rallies, and over 3 million people in America have given donations of an average of $27 to help his campaign. That itself is a revolutionary awakening in the United States of America, something to be welcomed and which reflects, as I said, the breakdown of the existing political order in the wealthiest, most established capitalist country in the history of the world. That must be welcomed. The awakening of the people in America must be welcomed. And I do not think, even if Sanders fails to win the nomination, I do not think the question will be over. Because don't forget, then it would be Clinton against Trump, and our task would be to attack and undermine Donald Trump and his campaign. Because that campaign, sorry?
Get Clinton in.
No, it's not saying that. I said attack and undermine Donald Trump's campaign. We would not approach the Clinton campaign in the same way. The purpose of the movement behind Bernie Sanders is to transform America. Transforming America means engaging millions and millions of people in participating in politics for the first time and in transforming the balance of power in society away from the billionaires and their hangers-on towards millions of people engaging in politics to transform power from the grassroots up to the top. That is the revolutionary change that has to happen. And it will not happen simply by electing Bernie Sanders President of America. After all, you might have seen the program last week about Barack Obama. Lots of dreams and hopes. With 100 days of presidency, they were wiped out. Nothing could be passed because politics is controlled by billionaires in America and corporations, not by the democratic vote of the people.
Any other questions? That was answer to one question. A bit long, but never mind.
Are there any questions from the audience?
Who's going to be the next president of America?
Well,
Donald Trump.
no. We've got 3 candidates at the moment. Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders. Who do I want? Bernie Sanders. Who do I not want? Donald Trump 1, Hillary Clinton 2. So, you got your answer.
But if he becomes
Were politics in America not rigged by billionaires, Bernie Sanders would be way ahead. The donations, for example, you might have seen Hillary Clinton. She spoke at a meeting at Goldman Sachs. And Bernie Sanders correctly said she got $225,000 for speaking at one meeting. So what did he say? He said, why doesn't she publish the speech that she made? After all, if you spoke for $275,000 and it was a fantastic speech, it must have been one hell of a speech to get $275,000. It must have been Shakespearean in order to justify that kind of payment. So why can't she publish it? Because ultimately, the political process in America today is run by billionaires 62 billionaires, don't forget, own more wealth today than half of the population of the planet. Half of the population of the planet. There are less people than I will speak to this afternoon own more wealth than half of the world's population. 140 companies, according to a study in the New Scientist published by Vitali et al., I think it was 2 years ago, 140 companies in the world, mostly banks, insurance companies, pension funds. They control 40% of world trade, all the goods and services moving around the world. 780 companies control 80% of world trade. So they control the political process. They own the media. They own the television stations. They own educational institutions. They control the police. They control the armies. They control the military industries. They control production, distribution and exchange of shipping, of manufacturing, of banking, insurance, pension funds. They control the flow of goods around the world. 3,000 ships a day move around the world with containers. They control world trade and the American Navy, which controls the seas of the world. They ensure the dominance of the United States of America, better said of capitalism in America. They control world trade through controlling the seas. They control the seas with nuclear fleets, with warships, with aircraft carriers, and with an army based in around, I think it's 50 different countries in the world. That is how the world is actually controlled. These are the institutional barriers to real democracy in society. That is why I say, if there was real democracy in America, Bernie Sanders would win outright, both in the Democratic Party and in the general election that will come up in November this year. But he may still win despite the opposition, because the people in the United States of America are waking up. And when they wake up, it will transform the entire world. Because America is not composed just of flag-waving idiots. It's composed of the ordinary people, working people, who arrived there from all over the world, trying to eke out an existence. And most of them still only eke out an existence, despite the promises and dreams that America is supposed to be based upon. Any other questions, ladies and gentlemen?
North Korea. What's going on in North Korea? Why are they doing what they're doing? What's the reason for North Korea?
The gentleman here asked me what's happening in North Korea. North Korea is a regime established as a consequence of the war between America, led by the United Nations, but actually America, against Korea. And they launched this war in order to stop the spread of communism, because China had already fallen, the Soviet Union had backed China, or largely backed China, and Indochina was under threat. Vietnam, there was a revolutionary war, and in Korea there was a revolutionary war. Now, after that, or after the defeat, or better said, after the war in Korea in 1953, Korea was divided. North Korea was just as well off as South Korea in the 1950s and 60s. But gradually, as the United States pumped money into South Korea, supporting a brutal dictatorship in South Korea, where even in 1986, 20,000 students were massacred, backed by American Britain, in South Korea. Now, only in the 1990s did South Korea develop economically very rapidly. When that happened, the dictatorship fell and a democracy was established in South Korea. This gave leeway to the Americans to attack North Korea and led to the, if you like, greater and greater isolationist position inside North Korea. But don't make the mistake of thinking that North Korea is simply a starvation hellhole. It is not true. North Korea housed its people, provided them with employment, and provided with the basics of life: healthcare, education and welfare. There are periods as a result of the stupid policy of the leadership of North Korea, of isolationism, of national self-strengthening rather than internationalization. The consequence of that is that when famine happens, because of weather conditions generally, not only but also, then the people will go hungry. But no regime, no matter how dictatorial, no matter how ideologically isolated, no regime in the world survives without a social base of support. Mussolini's fell, Adolf Hitler's also would have fallen. There were plots against him, attempts to overthrow him, attempts to assassinate him. You can be sure that in North Korea, millions of people disagree with the government, but also millions of people agree with the government because they remember their parents and their grandparents being bombed by the Americans. 2 million people died in Korea in one single bombing campaign, I believe it was 1952, launched by the Americans. That is why the North Koreans are still largely supportive of the regime in North Korea. However, the idiosyncrasies of the regime could be overcome by a policy of opening up, which I believe they should do, opening up to foreign trade, opening up to allow elements of the market into their economy, and allow the workers to democratically control production. And there were moves in this direction in the 1980s and the 1970s, where workers could elect the managers, which you can't do in England, and you can't do in South Korea. But the problem lies in the overall administrative structure of the Korean Workers' Party remains a Stalinist dictatorship. And that, I believe, if that changes, it could be attractive to the people. Don't forget, it was only in the mid-1990s that the mass opposition in South Korea changed from advocating unification of Korea to advocating democratization of their own society and social change in South Korea rather than both Koreas. The main slogans until the mid-90s were for the unification of Korea. And that, by the way, was illegal in South Korea at that time. It was only recently it became allowed that you could advocate these different positions. So that's roughly how I see the background to the structure of what's happening in Korea. Any further questions, ladies and gentlemen?
The Norwegian prison system, have they got it totally right or totally wrong? Giving publicity to the ventilators?
It's very difficult, isn't it? When you ask the question, what is the purpose of prison? Is it to change the person into a better person? Or is it to contain the person? Or is it to punish the person? Now, the British prison system is supposed to be designed to reform and prevent recidivism, prevent repeat of the crime. But actually the way the prison system is developed has produced a prison system which is punitive and punishment based, because you're locked in a cell for much of the day. The prisons themselves, built in Victorian times to cope with one person per cell, now have 2 or 3 people in a cell. The prison system is in a breakdown. So if you ask yourself what the purpose of prison is, I agree with the idea that prison, the main purpose should be to protect society and to reform the criminal. That should be the main purpose of prison. And therefore I agree with the general structure of the Norwegian prison system. I agree that even the most barbaric person should be treated respectfully despite what they have done. Because in this way, you send a message out to society that we are after changing people to better people, rather than punishing people as brutal murderers. But is it the right thing to do as a message to wider society? I believe it is. Precisely the reason why you asked the question is the reason why it's right. Because we have to ask ourselves where we want to go in the future. The long-term objective of any society should be that we have no prisons and that crime is reduced to the minimal amount, and the culture
prevents crime rather than repression. Then you'd reduce the prisons, then you'd reduce the police, then you'd reduce the army, then you'd reduce the need for the judiciary, then you'd reduce the need for the lawyers. A lot of people have got interests in crime. All of them are dependent upon criminals. Judges, police, prisons, they're all dependent upon criminals. They thrive off criminality. Criminality is necessary for their existence. And therefore this symbiotic relationship between judiciary, prisons, police and criminals, and after all, more money is spent on the prison system, on policing, on the judiciary and on the apparatus of lawyers and so on, barristers and so on, than is spent raising the living standards of the poor who are driven into crime by circumstance. Now that doesn't mean all crimes committed by the poor, nor does it mean all crime will disappear with the eradication of poverty. But it's a step in the right direction, and it would have multiple effects which would lead to improvements in the general psychology and social structure that we live under. Because by reducing policing, reducing crime, reducing prisons, reducing the judiciary, reducing lawyers, we eliminate a huge amount of wastage in society. Wastage in society, because that's what it is. Any other further questions or contributions? Anything you'd like me to touch upon quickly? I think Britain will probably remain inside, but I don't know. It's a touch and go issue. It's become almost like a cause célèbre of people who don't like the system in society, who are not happy with what's going on, to say, well, maybe we should leave the European Union. And they imagine that somehow we'll have more independence, more democracy. This is nonsense. There will be no more democracy if Britain leaves the euro. No more democracy. And in any case, if I give you my honest point of view, the European Union is likely to break up anyway. I believe it is better, however, to wait inside the European Union for that process to occur and to campaign alongside our brothers and sisters in other European countries to make a plan for an alternative Europe, a Europe based on the needs of the people, a constitution for the people of the whole of Europe. And we could start not by advocating leaving Europe, but by advocating a constitution in Britain, a written constitution. And in that written constitution there should be inscribed guaranteed employment for all who want it, guaranteed income for all who do not work, education for all, no matter what background you're from, money to study for all, universal healthcare for all in Britain and all in Europe. In that way you can lay down basic structures of democratic and social rights for the people, which then can be the barrier that saves us against any attacks that might come from the European Union. But let's be clear, let's not pretend that Europe is something it is not. Europe is a German capitalist dominated institution. Germany depends on Europe for the following reason. 50% of the German economy is dependent on exports. 50% of those exports go to the European Union. So Europe is actually a sales market for German capitalism. That's what it has been created for. The original auspices of the European Union were supposed to be to prevent war by linking France and Germany together in an inextricable bond that will prevent the outbreak of war between them, which of course was said to be the cause of the First and Second World Wars. However, or the background to the First and Second World War. However, the reality is, many people believe, and I also believe, it is a good thing to be able to travel anywhere in Europe. It's a good thing to be able to move without passports inside Europe. It's a good thing to have social rights inside the workplaces in Europe. It's a good thing even to have a single currency, in my opinion. Not this single currency, but a single currency. It's a good thing that people can move freely in Europe. It's a good thing you can seek employment in Europe. It's a good thing European students can study here and we can study in Europe. I believe progress that serves the needs of the people should be the main attitude by which we approach the vote on staying or leaving Europe. And for that reason, I believe, as a tactical measure, it's important to stay inside Europe and fight for change by making alliances between the workers of Europe. How can that be done? Make a database online of all companies employing more than 500 workers. Link them together with all accounts and all information about working conditions, exports, imports, production, distribution, exchange. Plan what is done with the banks, the industries, the services of Europe through those companies employing more than 500 workers each. Plan what is done with the resources so we do not get the barbarity that we are seeing today in relation to the policy being introduced on this very day in Greece by the European Union to turn the people back when they cross over to Lesbos from Turkey, and to finance the Turkish government that itself is launching a terrorist war against its own people in Kurdistan. Don't forget the Turkish government, who we are allied to, is playing a double game in Syria. They support the fight, supposedly, against ISIS, but actually they bomb the people who are fighting ISIS. The Kurds, who are the only people who have decisively defeated ISIS in Kobani, they are being bombed by the Turks. That's why the bomb went off last week in Ankara. That's why. Because the Turkish government is in league with ISIS, with Islamic Daesh, as they're called now in the British Parliament. Now we are in alliance with them. That's how mad the world is. Why are we in alliance with them? Because the people fleeing from the murders carried out by Turkey's allies in Syria and Iraq, the people fleeing from that have to go through Turkey in order to escape. When they arrive in Turkey, they are beaten up, treated like shit by the people in Turkey. Not everybody, but a significant amount. Because Turkish people are poor generally. The consequence of that is they hope to come to Europe. But now when they arrive in Europe, they will be, from tomorrow, better said, from midnight tonight, the thousands who get on boats tomorrow will be turned back at gunpoint by the European Union. That, ladies and gentlemen, how is that different from the Berlin Wall? How is it different? These people fleeing from their lives. How is it different from what happened just before the Second World War? Don't forget, Jews wanted to flee from Germany and Britain refused to take them. And at the end of the Second World War, the British government pretended they were allies of the Jews. Because of the Holocaust, they said, well, the reason we fought the Second World War was because of the Holocaust. That's a lie. It's a lie. While Germany was murdering Jews in Auschwitz, Britain was murdering Indians in West Bengal.
The churches.
3 million people in West Bengal were murdered by the British by starvation. Most of the people who died in Auschwitz were also killed by starvation because they were producing food for the British Army during the Second World War, when the people of India had nothing to eat. That followed, of course, there wasn't only one massacre in India. In 1850s, in India, the British government, which controlled India, killed between 10 and 20 million people in India by starving them to death. So, for the British to pretend they fought the Second World War because of the defence of the Jews, it's just nonsense. Utter and complete nonsense. Not only that, but the monarchy in Britain the establishment in Britain, and even Winston Churchill, up to a certain time, 1926, Churchill said, praised Mussolini as a great hero of the Italian people. If I were Italian, I would be in the black shirts. That's what he said. Winston Churchill
And they said-
supported the fascists. They didn't actually bomb.
No.
Kurds.
He said something else as well. He said the Jews, they are not desirable people in the Second World War. Well,
Maybe. But in any case, the point being, the stories we are told about history and the stories we are told about today, they have a common thread. They are distortions and they are lies. Once you begin to understand how the real structure of society is organized, you can break down today's lies and you can break down historical lies and then connect the dots together, and you will understand that we are always living in war. Always living in war. Not a war between countries, but a war inside every country. What is that war? The war is over. Who gets what? And after all, aren't all wars about that? Who gets what? What nation steals from another? But then within the nation, who gets the wealth? Within the nation? Since 2008, living standards in Europe and the United States of America, the wealthiest areas of the world, living standards have fallen for 80% of the population. That is a war. It's a war organized by the wealthiest people in society and the institutions that defend them, the army, the police, the judiciary, the corporations, the banks, Parliament, against the people of their own country. What else was the budget? Today they say sugar tax. Jamie Oliver goes, yeah, sugar tax. What they mean is a tax on the poor. A tax on the poor. Because the little kid goes in the shop and says, Mama, can we have some Coca-Cola? A little treat for the kids. No, it's perfectly true, that's not good for you. Perfectly true, it's not good. But the reason they put a tax on there is a sneaky means. We're looking after your health, but you can't buy those things for your kids anymore because they'd be too expensive. All these methods they use, they claim to be in your interest. They even claim handing money to the rich is a good thing for the poor. For the poor. Because when the rich get lots of money, they spend it on investment. But the fact of the matter is, since 2008, the evidence is overwhelming. And worldwide, give more money to the rich and less goes to the poor. Simple as that. Simple as that. And the fact of the matter is, money is only valuable to the poor. The poor people think money is hard to get. They think the world has got shortage. That's why they can come out with this nonsense they put out in economics textbooks where they say economics is about the management of shortage. No, ladies and gentlemen. Economics is about manufacturing shortage, creating the illusion of shortage. There is no shortage of the ability of human beings to produce food,
shelter.
clothing, shelter, education, housing, healthcare. No shortage in any of them. We have cybernetic networks. We have nanotechnology. We have biotechnology. We have stem cell technology, which means any organ in your body. You can take the stem cell from a child who is born, from the umbilical cord of a child, and from that you can grow organs of any part of the human body. And when those organs fail at 70 or 80 years of age, you can replace them. You can replace their lungs, their teeth, their eyes, their ears, their skull, their bones, their legs, their arms, their hand. You can replace it all. You can grow them on a pig and implant them, transplant them onto a human. It's being done already. You lie, it's done already. They grow human ears on mice. and then transplant them onto a human being. We live in the most developed scientific and technical age in history. Every year, advances in science and technology that should be improving our lives, they are used against us. The internet, invented by public money, created by public money, by taxpayers' money. What did they do with it? They made these few companies, a handful of companies, working hand in glove with the American Secret Services, National Security Agency and British Intelligence Agency, so-called intelligence, GCHQ. What did they do? They sent a submarine under the Atlantic Ocean, and the pipe that connects America to England, carrying all the data, they tapped into it and they collected every single electronic communication for years. All of our communication, illegally collected. They spied, the American government spied on the United Nations leaders, the leaders of Europe, the British government, spied on all of them. Listened to every phone call they made. And then they say, the American government, the American establishment, the British establishment is there for you. The government is for you. It's not for you. The government operates a structure of power linked to big business and the intelligence agencies and the military, whose purpose is one single purpose: to maintain a constant war against the people of their own country and the people of the entire world, to increase the amount of wealth going to the wealthiest and decrease the wealth going to the poor. That is the structure of world power. But we can have peace. And by peace I mean this: end the rule of 780 companies, end the rule of the banks, end the rule of a handful of big businesses. 150 businesses out of 5 million in Britain control Britain. 150. You know them: Sainsbury's, Barclays Bank, Tesco's, Asda, Lidl, NatWest Bank, Lloyds Bank, Barings Bank, Marks and Spencers. You know, these companies, they control society, and their owners are the only beneficiaries out of the system we live under today. Millions and millions of people in Britain, billions of people around the world are maintained in poverty. Half the world's population lives on less than $2 a day. Half the world's population, while 62 people own more wealth than half of the world. That, ladies and gentlemen, must change. That's why we have started change inside the Labour Party. That's why Bernie Sanders is getting support in the amongst the Democratic voters in the United States. And a revolutionary change is being signalled by this process. But in order to be successful, we require the active support of millions of people in every country of the world to bring about a fundamental change in the way in which society is organised. Work, education, leisure should be the democratic will of the people. It should not be a burden, should not be a struggle. Work, leisure, pleasure should be merged into one. Technology, each step in advancing technology should mean a reduction in the working week, a reduction in the burden of work, a reduction in the hierarchy at work, and more democratic control over what we do with our lives and the future of our planet. Thanks very much, ladies and gentlemen. It's been a pleasure talking to you.